Thanks for being here. I'm pleased to report that our cabinet is holding its first retreat, and we're doing so in the cheapest way possible here at a government building in downtown Calgary to show leadership by example in restraining our expenses. And what we are doing is reviewing the progress our government has made to date while revising our plans, or I should say ensuring that we continue implementation of our platform agenda to make life better for Albertans. And really the theme is one of promises made and promises kept. I'm pleased to report that our government has so far delivered on 55 of the 375 platform commitments that were made in our positive plan to get Alberta back on track, Alberta strong and free. And we are making progress on a number of others. And so we're only, I gather, about 6% of the way into our mandate, and yet we've committed 15 of our platform commitments. This includes very important commitments such as Bill number 1, the Carbon Tax Repeal Act, with the proclaiming of Bill 12, the so-called Turn Off the Taps legislation. We passed the Red Tape Reduction Act and have already begun our ambitious plan to reduce by a third the red tape burden that's killing jobs in Alberta. We have enacted a job creation tax cut and, of course, brought in a number of other of our commitments. We launched the McKinnon panel. We're expecting to hear back from Chairman McKinnon and her colleagues in mid-August. We saved $640 million for taxpayers by cancelling the super lab boondoggle of the NDP and to stop their nationalization of lab services. We launched a public inquiry into foreign sources of funds behind the anti-Alberta energy campaign. We've laid the groundwork for launching the Energy War Room that will stand up for Alberta and fight back against those who've been engaged in a highly coordinated foreign-funded campaign of defamation against our energy industry. And so our government's been in office for only 85 days. We were sworn in 85 days ago, and I'm pleased to report to Albertans that we hit the ground running, focused on jobs, the economy, and pipelines, on standing up for Alberta and making life better for Albertans, and we are delivering on those commitments. We did so through the 7 weeks of the spring legislative session, passing 13 bills, which I think is without precedent in Alberta legislative history, bills that are generating new economic growth. And in fact, I'm very pleased to report that we see strong signs of economic renewal in Alberta. StatsCan has reported that 10,000 new jobs were created in Alberta in June, mostly full-time private sector jobs, and mostly here in the hard-hit city of Calgary. Both the Toronto-Dominion Bank and the Conference Board of Canada have recently raised their economic growth projections for our province. Last week, TD issued this report, Alberta's Economy Gaining Traction, in which they have upgraded their economic forecast for Alberta, saying that, quotes, recent encouraging data have added credence to the view that economic growth in Alberta is gaining traction. And they said that this was thanks to increased business activity and confidence, quotes, in recent weeks. In other words, since this government came to office and began our pro-growth policy agenda. We've seen similar upgrading of Alberta's economic growth forecasts from the Conference Board of Canada. Urban housing starts have totaled nearly 2,700 in June, a spike of nearly 22% compared to the same month of last year. And international oil prices are stable, and the differential for Western Canadian Select has shrunk to less than $10 a barrel. Oil producers, I should say, are looking to increase production and shipping more crude by rail. And there's been a modest return of international investment to the oil sands in our petrochemical sector. Multiple liquefied natural gas projects are moving forward, thanks in part to widespread government support in Canada for new gas pipelines. And our government has delivered on our commitment to build alliances across the Federation to help us get a fair price for our resources. I was pleased to host here 5 of our premiers from across the country who are completely aligned with Alberta when it comes to building pipelines, energy infrastructure, opposing the carbon tax, and supporting economic growth. And I was very happy, both at the Western Premiers Conference that I hosted in Edmonton, as well as the Council of the Federation in Saskatoon, to see a growing number of provinces supporting Alberta's economic agenda, including, for example, the decision of Quebec Premier Legault to intervene alongside us at the Supreme Court of Canada in defense of provincial taxpayers and provincial jurisdiction against the threatened federal carbon tax imposition. I was also pleased to see at the Council of the Federation that 12 of the 13 premiers signed on to the vision of creating economic and energy corridors both east to west and north to south, including oil pipelines. So clearly we see a growing number of allies across the country. I was also pleased with the support that we received initially from the Senate of Canada in rewriting Bill C-69, the No More Pipelines Law, and Bill C-48, the tanker ban, of which the Senate Energy Committee had sought to veto. Unfortunately, as we know, those bills were since revived by the Trudeau government, but at least it demonstrated that when we tell Alberta's story to people across the country, that many Canadians are willing to listen and help us to get a fair deal in the Federation. With all of those measures, we're excited about the action that we have achieved, the momentum under this government. We have a lot more heavy lifting to do. We're discussing, for example, the upcoming budget, which we anticipate in late October, and the challenges that we're going to have to restore fiscal balance to Alberta, to preserve our public services, and prevent this province from sinking in a sea of debt in the future. So with that, I'm pleased to report to Albertans that after 85 days, not even 3 months in office, that we are keeping our promises, that the economy is growing, and that we're making progress. Happy to take your questions.
What is your reaction to the fact that prosecutable files are being stayed because there's not enough prosecutors in our province?
I'm very concerned to hear criminals are getting off scot-free because of this is totally unacceptable. And that is why our government will be hiring 50 new provincial Crown prosecutors to help ensure that criminals have their day in court, and that we help to crack down on crime and wherever possible to get convictions so that criminals are paying their time behind bars rather than walking the streets, creating new victims.
And with those 50 new prosecutors, any idea for how long?
Well, the Minister of Justice will be making an announcement about that in the not too distant future, but that was a strong platform commitment, a very clear platform commitment. It's part of a $10 million additional investment in the Crown Prosecutor Service because, it is the first responsibility of government is to maintain public safety. And the notion that criminals are getting off scot-free simply because we have an inadequate number of prosecutors is, to me, totally unacceptable, which is why even with a really tight fiscal situation, we have made this a priority to invest in 50 new prosecutors at an estimated cost of $10 million, and that there will be an announcement about that. Stay tuned.
And any reaction to the UCP and other political parties being denied to march in the Calgary Pride Parade?
I wasn't aware of that, but that was a decision they made last year. Unfortunately, the same group has also told the Canadian Armed Forces and Calgary Police Service and the RCMP they're not welcome. I don't think that's in touch with the broad mainstream. I wish folks who are celebrating Pride a wonderful time to celebrate diversity, respect, and dignity. I wish that were done in a very inclusive way. Certainly, I know a lot of Conservatives will, in any event, participate. But I wish that instead of telling the public who can't come, instead it was an inclusive event.
And what do you make of claims from other political parties about the UCP not having a record worth defending when it comes to support for LGBTQ Albertans?
I disagree, and ours is a party that respects human dignity. As I've said since we began our campaign to unite Albertans 3 years ago, that in our province we don't care how you pray or where you came from or who you love. You have full respect and equal dignity in this province, and so I think I demonstrated that as the federal immigration minister, creating Canada's first and only refugee resettlement program for persecuted gay refugees, specifically for those from the Middle East whose lives are being threatened because of their sexual orientation. And I'm proud to have met a number of those people here in Alberta and across Canada who have started new and safe lives thanks to the generosity of this country.
Premier, you were obviously involved with approving funds for the Green Line, the transit project. City Council next week is going to be discussing whether to put that on ice to review it and kind of see whether it's cost effective. Are you still confident that it will be built in any way?
I look forward to meeting Mayor Nenshi in the near future. That will obviously be a topic for discussion. I've said that I think prominent Calgarians have raised some reasonable questions about the cost and design of the current Green Line. As federal minister, I announced $1.53 billion in federal funds for a Green Line back in the spring of 2015 that was supposed to run, I think, 46 kilometers and serve the entire city from the far north to the far southeast. And I still have outstanding questions, as do many Calgarians, about why that got cut in half, why we're paying why essentially we're paying twice as much for half as much track. It doesn't make sense to me, and I think Calgarians deserve answers in what will be the single largest infrastructure project in Alberta history. So I think that some members of City Council and prominent Calgary business leaders are right to raise those questions. We support rapid transit. We support an expansion of the LRT network in Alberta. We will respect the $1.5 billion commitment of the provincial government, but we want to make sure that we're getting as much service as possible. As many communities as possible should be included in that, and so I do hope City Council takes a very serious look at that, and we will be asking them to as a one-third funder of the project.
Right. And sorry, do you know when you're having this meeting with Mayor Nenshi?
Soon.
Okay.
Premier, you've talked about positive economic indicators. There have been some negative ones as well. Analysts at RBC scaled back expectations for oil and gas drilling. Retail sales were down last month. The unemployment rate remains elevated and wage growth is stagnant. How do you respond to these indicators and what changes can we expect?
Well, none of that's consistent with the actual data as reported, for example, last week by TD Bank and as recently by the Conference Board of Canada or by Statistics Canada, all of which show a significant increase in private sector employment in Alberta, an increase in the size of our economy. We see increasing investment, and so the data is clear. But these are early signs. We're far from out of the woods. We have the NDP dug us into a very deep hole with the worst economic record of any Alberta government since the Great Depression. They drove us up to having consistently the highest unemployment outside Atlantic Canada. We inherited a situation with about 170,000 Albertans out of work, looking for work, and a total loss of investor confidence in this province. So we're not going to be able to dig our way out of that overnight, but early signs are very encouraging, which again is why TD Bank said that Alberta's economy is gaining traction as demonstrated by data in recent weeks.
Premier, right now, just for Calgarians, top of mind is the new Flames Arena. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, just in consideration of the $60 million being cut in city funds.
Well, that's a decision for the City Council, and we respect their authority to make capital spending decisions on behalf of Calgarians, and it's not my business to dictate to them how they should do that. This is an issue that's obviously been debated for several years in this city, and which I will, as a Calgarian, follow with interest over the next few days. But our focus as a government is jobs and growth, and restoring balance back to the province's finances. I'm pleased to say that we're not being asked as a province to chip in to this project. The city is taking the burden together with the owners of the Flames. And so I will just leave it at that and say we will follow this debate with interest, but ultimately this is a decision that belongs to City Council and Calgary voters.
We'll go to,
Sort of a follow-up on that, obviously, some controversy has come up in terms of how long the public has to consult about this. Do you think that the timeline is long enough? They only have till Friday?
Again, I'll leave that to City Council. It's not for me to, I'll be honest with you. I don't appreciate it when municipal politicians start criticizing everything the provincial government does. So I'm going to show some mutual respect by not interfering in something that's completely in the backyard of City Council. They are accountable to Calgary voters and taxpayers, and they're not accountable to me on this or the provincial government. This is a municipal and civic issue. I think most Calgarians would love to see a new arena, a new major event center. I think almost all Calgarians would love to see the Flames continue to have their home here in Calgary, but most Calgarians want to make sure that it's a fair deal in terms of the fiscal challenges facing the city. So I'm just stating the obvious there, but it's up to City Council to strike the right balance.
we have time for one more?
Yes. Oh, hi, how are you?
So regarding the India and agriculture, because now we are losing some agriculture money export, and do you have any plan to generate more business with the India?
Yes, well, this is why I visited India together with Minister Panda and Minister Drishan last fall, in part to call for an elimination of Indian government tariffs on our pulses and lentils. And we had high-level Indian government discussions in that regard. We're hopeful that now that they are past the federal elections, that the Indian government will reconsider those tariffs. Given the recent barriers on agricultural exports to China, this underscores the importance of diversifying Alberta's export markets for agricultural and other products. And so our government recently dispatched Minister Tanya Furr of Economic Development and Trade to a trade mission in South Korea and to Japan, and we will be having similar trade promotion visits to India. India is the second largest country in the world with a rapidly growing middle class, with increasing disposable incomes, which is also a Commonwealth, Westminster democracy with such closely aligned values and interests with us here in Canada. So it is a natural trading partner. I've always been disappointed by the low levels of trade that we have with India. For me, a top priority in Alberta's trade strategy will be a massive expansion of trade with India, and that's exactly why I went there last November and look forward to getting back, hopefully, in 2020. With that, folks, I've got to get back to chairing the meeting upstairs. Thanks very much for being here. I appreciate it.